Section 6 of Shadowland, October 1919. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Chris Pyle. Shadowland, October 1919, by Various. The World and Its Woman, by Jane Ward. The World and Its Woman related in story form from the photoplay of Thompson Buchanan, produced by Diva Pictures Incorporated for release through Goldwyn Pictures. Starring Geraldine Farrar as Marcia Warren, supported by Lou Tellegren as the Prince, W. Lawson Britt as Peter Poroshin, Arthur Carew as Count Alex Vorontsov, Alex B. Francis as Prince Michael Orbeliana, Edwin J. Connolly as Robert Warren, Naomi Childers as Baroness Olga Inalaveria, Madame Rose Dion as Irina Rodina, and Lydia Yeamans Titus as Mamie Connors. Directed by Frank Lloyd. This was before the world went mad. This was before the old gods of might and right of birth went toppling into shattered shards of clay. And on the great estates of Prince Michael Orbeliani, the peasants still labored like dumb beasts, not knowing that they had souls or kinship with God. I simply wasn't visible at all, Marcia Warren laughed. She had a generous laugh that parted her full, deeply crimson lips over strong, even white teeth. It wasn't that they snubbed me, little father. That would have implied that, humble, vile as I was, they had condescended to see me. Still, I shouldn't complain. She made a mock obeisance. Have I not been permitted to hold a dipper of water for his high and holiness? He is great in mightiness, and, little father, he has nice eyes. John Warren, a gray man with a face wrinkled as though his flesh no longer fitted his soul, looked at the fresh, glowing girlhood before him with the straining, puzzled nearsightedness of the old trying to see and understand the young. "I wish," he said slowly, "I wish we were back in the States. Back in old Mapleton with its Methodist ice cream festivals and its elm trees and friendliness. I wish there was some fresh-cheeked youngster sitting on the front steps under the wisteria courting you. Russia isn't any place for young people who are just starting to live, or old people who are just about ready to stop living. A man may spend all his life in a stranger country, Marcia, but he gets homesick to die in his own land." Marcia chose to ignore the latter part of the words. "I fancy Mapleton would be a tight fit for me, little father." She stretched out her young arms in a splendid free gesture. "I need room, lots of room to live in. I couldn't be satisfied with tight little thoughts and neat, orderly little ideas that smell of mothballs and have been made over out of other people's views. And somehow, I don't think I could be satisfied with that fresh-cheeked youngster either. I'm rather a big person, if you know what I mean, and when I love he will be a big man. Maybe not a very respectable man, nor a good man even, but big with great splendid sins and flashes of God himself." Dread gripped him. He shook her arm. "Marcia, you're speaking of someone real. Is it the young prince?" Her smile was like a steady flame. It was as though a lamp were lighted in some far chamber of her soul, illuminating her. "Yes, little father," proudly. "It is Michael. It will always be Michael, I think. The first time I saw him, years ago when we were children, I knew somehow, with a kind of clairvoyance, that I was a woman-child. No other man had ever made me feel that, little father. Oh, of course it's impossible. I knew it then, when he was only a straight, solemn boy with a kingly way of carrying his head and one small hand laid on the neck of his great hound. But I'm not going to be sorry, ever. Only glad that he's in the same world that I am, where I can see him, sometimes in the distance. I care so very much." "My poor child," John Warren said brokenly. "Will your wonderful, fine life be like a strain of music that is never played then? You should have had love, Marcia. You should have borne children." She touched his hand lightly. "I shall sing my song, father, don't worry," she told him. "And all children are not of flesh and blood. When the time comes, I shall bear my child." Late that evening she stood in her bare little room, austere as a nun's, looking vaguely out across the great veldt, stark under the cold light of the stars. A wave of loneliness, bitter with tears, washed over her soul. A prescience of barren years of unfulfillment. Would it not, after all, be better for her if she went back to the pleasant friendliness of little places, green fields, white towns, homely, commonplace things? But even as she asked the question, she answered it, never. Should she be a coward and flee from life? Should she exchange reality, even though it was the reality of pain and hunger, for shadows of peace? "I am not afraid," she challenged life. "You cannot conquer me. There is nothing you can do that shall conquer me." A hesitant rap on her door was followed by her father's voice. "Marcia, are you still up? A strange thing has happened." He stood in the doorway, a candle in his hands. "The old prince has sent for you to come to the castle to sing to him. It seems he heard you one day as he was riding by and thought your voice was like his wife's, dead years ago." And so it happened that for the first time in her life, Marcia Warren, whose 20 years had nearly all been spent in Russia, where her father was the manager of Prince Orbeliana's oil wells, set her free-born foot over the door-sill of the nobility. She stood in the great dark hall, waiting for the prince to summon her. All about her suits of armor leered out of the shadows, vague tapestries stirred in the chill draughts, blazoned escutcheons gleamed with crimson that was like the blood of peasant generations. In this hall, no doubt, the dark lords of the manor had dealt out life and death to their serfs, had drunk and wassailed to still the howling of the winter wolves on the white barrens. Into these dismal portals they had received the terrified maidens come to pay the ruthless lord his manor rite of their virginity upon their wedding eve. It seemed to her vivid imagining that the shadows were not cast by the great torches in their high scones, but by old ill deeds done long ago, shadows of selfishness and pride and sin. The present prince was a good man, she had heard her father say, and her heart argued for the younger Michael, and yet, who had decreed that they should be fed by others' hungering, that they should dance as they were dancing now in the great ballroom, below the balcony, while the women in the village brought forth dead babies starved in the womb. She crept to the edge of the balcony and looked down with somber eyes upon the glittering scene below, the slim, scented women of the aristocrats with their silken skins and jewels, the men with curled hair and beards, brave in white and gold lace, vain of their varnished boots, blasé contemptuous of lip and glance. The glow from the chandeliers was caught up in the facets of 1,000 jewels, filling the room with darting flashes. Cold sparks of light. With a shudder, as though she looked on something loathsome, Marcia Warren, daughter of the pilgrims, turned away. "There is a day coming," she said aloud, "when the piper will want his pay." And since the prince still delayed, in sending for her, she moved on down the hall to where, at the end, through parted velvet curtains, a breath of blossoms sent out invitation. 5 minutes later she stood again in the hall, pressing her clasped hands upon the tumult of her heart. Those slender arms, very white along his shoulders, those low, broken murmurs, snatches of trembling laughter, and that kiss. Her lips felt hot and moist as though in mockery. She had been beautiful, that woman in the prince's arms, beautiful in a still marble fashion, wondrously gowned, a woman to wear sables regally, to draw the glances of the crowds. Why should she be surprised that he is to be married, she asked her heart, trying to sting it from its numbness with the lash of scorn. It is the nature of a man to mate with his kind, an aristocrat with aristocracy. What is it to you who he holds against his heart, whose lips he crushes? Why do you, O God? She pressed her teeth upon her lower lips and closed her eyes, but even behind the lowered lids she could see them as she had seen them a moment ago, as she would see them through sleepless nights to come, the strong, noble face that she had hung like an icon in the shrine of her heart, bent over the icy beauty of Olga, Baroness of Breslov, pressing upon the perfect lips a kiss that shook her, watching it. She scarcely was aware of what she did until she stood in the dim-lit library before the frail old figure, sunken in its velvet chair, and began to sing. Then out of the agony and travail of her heart came forth a song. The dusk throbbed to its world passion, world pain. The notes were like silver ingots hot from the crucible, molten in the fires of the soul. When the last echo had quivered into silence, the old prince lifted his frosted head and looked keenly at the young, spent face among the shadows. "You are a great singer, my child," he told her gently. "Some day the world shall crown you with a crown beside which our coronets will be worthless as straw." These words were to come back to her years later, as she stood in the wings of the great opera at Petrograd, waiting to make her first appearance as prima donna, years in which she toiled until she was spent in body and soul over tedious exercises, struggling to put aside her grieving for her father's death, and that other grief, which mercifully grew gentler with the years until she was almost able to think of Michael as one who had died very long ago. As she stood in the jeweled gown of Thais, the glare of the footlights revealed a figure rounded into gracious womanhood, a face serene and thoughtful with a beauty that was more than physical. If the dusky fullness of the lips, the hollows of the throat, the curving breasts cried to the beholder, "I am made for the sweet offices of love," The low forehead and dark eyes, disdainful of coquetry, said gravely, "I am made for thought." "She's beautiful, isn't she?" whispered one girl of the ballet to another, looking toward the still, white figure. "They say she hasn't any lovers, but I can't believe that." "I've heard that she is a revolutionist," the other muttered. "My seamstress told me. She's as Peter Porcine. The Red Leader is mad about her." "Ah, there goes her cue. Do you suppose she's frightened? Just think, the house is filled with titles tonight. A cousin to the Tsar in one of the boxes." Beyond the footlights a blur, a murmur, as she stood before them so different in her nun-like purity from the other prima donnas. Fleshy, stereotyped, corseted. A blur in one face leaping to her eyes out of the thousands turned to her. And in one cosmic moment all her hard-won peace was gone. He was sitting in one of the boxes with his wife and another man with glossy, brilliantined beard and long, restless white hands. He leaned a little forward, and she thought he made an involuntary sign of recognition, as though his soul had greeted a kindred soul. And suddenly her spirit was caught up in a great surge of joy, and she began to sing. The papers of the next morning were full of the sensational success of the young American singer, but the club rooms and tea tables buzzed with another tale. Prince Michael had at last succumbed. He had gone straight from his box to the singer's dressing room. He had remained with her 10 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, according to the imagination of the raconteur. He had already established her in an apartment on the Mall. He had been repulsed. He hadn't been repulsed. What luck for her! A prince of the royal blood. Handsome as a young god, too, and quite free to love whom he chose, for didn't the whole world know of his wife's disgraceful affair with Count Otto? And after all, she might be charming and have a golden voice and all that, but, my dear, she was only an American, a nobody at all. And while the wiseacres wagged industrious tongues, Marcia Warren was living in a world apart, a little world with only 2 inhabitants, a little world as small as the heart of a woman, yet touching the nethermost stars. For Prince Michael had told her that he loved her, told her with a trace of the aristocrat in his voice, but with truth in his eyes, and that night, when she knelt after her old child fashion to say the childhood prayers, she thanked God very earnestly that this thing had come to her, to remember when she be old. For with rather remarkable innocence she did not understand what Michael wanted of her, and in strange awe of that innocence that made a sort of sanctuary about her like a nun's robes, he did not enlighten her until there came a moment when her nearness and his man-need of her flung aside all scruples, and he took her into his arms and kissed her wide, grave eyes shut, and her lips into a crimson flower. Then, feeling her tremble, he set her down, and they faced each other across the memory of that stolen, heady moment of joy. "Marcia, I want you. I must have you," Michael said hoarsely like a tragic boy. "After that kiss, dear, we belong to each other. What do conventions matter? What does anything matter before that? I want you as I never wanted woman before, for I love you as I never loved a woman." "Your wife," Marcia said steadily, and touched his hand gently in mother pity for him, forgetting her own pain. "Then, even if that barrier were gone, we could never marry, you an aristocrat, I a woman of the people. Are you asking me to be your mistress, Michael?" "I am asking you to be my love," he said bitterly, for he saw that he had lost the battle. "You cannot love me if you will let a word stand between." "It is a world that stands between us," she corrected, "and the world will have to fall into ruin and be made new again before I can come to you openly in the sun with God looking on." "Then the world will fall into ruins," Prince Michael cried passionately, "for the turning of the night into the day is not more certain than that you and I shall one day come together. It was written so before the stars were made." It was only the first of many sieges he laid to her resolution, but she steadily refused, sensing that there was much of the dross of self in his love, holding her own as too high and holy a thing for profanation. Even when his wife openly confessed the shame of their marriage by leaving Petrograd with Count Otto, of the glossy beard and white hands, she refused to encourage a divorce. "Marriage with me would outcast you, beggar you, and in the eyes of your church and of the world, it would be no true marriage," she said wearily, and when he forgot caution and told her baldly what the world whispered of them, she only smiled a little quivering smile. "We know the truth," she told him. "Oh, my prince, can't you see that I am trying to protect our love? It is all I have had of life, all I shall ever have." For she did not believe in miracles, and only a miracle could clear away the barriers between. Even when the storm clouds of the Revolution began to gather, it did not occur to her that here might be solution. In her early days in Petrograd, when she had been a struggling student, she had allied herself with the young radicals of the student quarter, drawn to them by her innate love of democracy and sturdy American detestation of class privilege. Even after she became an opera idol, she kept up this connection, and now suddenly she found herself at the heart of the storm. The poor feeble puppet Tsar came tumbling down from his painted throne. The aristocrats and rulers were flung into the prisons they had so often filled, or fled from the city to crouch in hiding from the despised peasants. Red anarchy stalked through the streets of Petrograd, leaving its bloody footprints broadcast on the pavements, touching its torch in grisly mischief to the roofs of stately palaces. Prince Michael Orbeliani, already more than half a Democrat at heart, left the city for his estates in the Caucasus to deal with his peasants single-handed, and Marcia Warren, sick at soul, remained in her beautiful apartment in the city, from the windows of which she saw sights that drained the blood from her cheeks. Nothing in the few months of her love time had been so hard for her as the thought that she could not share his danger with him. She had been strong enough to refuse happiness, but her courage quailed and faltered at refusing to suffer with him. She was sitting at her piano, touching the keys with listless fingers one morning when Peter Poroshin, the Red Leader, made his way in, contemptuous of doorbells of ceremony. He was a great, coarse-featured brute of a man with thick, squat hands, covered with red hairs and a kind of animal odor about him. She shuddered instinctively under the covetousness of his look, though she tried to speak with the old friendliness. But he waved her words aside, laughing with a queer, sidewise laugh that exposed yellow fangs. "This is a busy time. Let's to business." She saw that he was drunk with his new power. "We revolutionists are choosing our women before we turn them over to the state. I might have a damned haughty aristocrat if I chose, but no. You knew years ago that I was mad about you, Marcia, but you were after bigger game then. Now there isn't anyone bigger than I am, and I've come for you." He saw her recoil, and anger thickened his coarse face with blood. He caught at her shoulder with a snarl. "So we're putting on the airs of a cursed aristocrat since we have had a prince to kiss us." He thrust his bestial face forward. "Well, all I need to do is say the word, tell my merry friends out there that you're a friend of the nobility, and there'll be a hemp necklace around that pretty neck in a jiffy." She faced him, head proudly high. "You can't frighten me, Peter Poroshin," she told him. "I would welcome death rather than give myself to you." He could have taken her then and there, but her clear gaze cowed him. He turned his anger into another channel. "I can tell you a piece of news, Madam High and Mighty, that will take you down a peg, perhaps. Your damned prince has returned to town." Now, indeed, she quivered, as though his words had been blows. "No, that's a lie to frighten me. How do you know? Where is he?" Poroshin laughed savagely. "Oh, he was seen all right by one of our spies. He had on the revolutionary uniform, and he's at his old rooms now. But in half an hour he'll be safe, in hell. And then, my Lady Disdain, I'll attend to you." He flung open the door, calling outside, "Feta, come here, my pretty chicken." The woman that entered was a veritable giantess with hands like hams and a bristly mustache that gave her dull face a fierce aspect. Poroshin pointed to the stricken Marcia. "There's the girl. Guard her well now, if you prize your worthless life, and I'll return in an hour or so." The door crashed to across his words. Marcia sprang to her feet, flung herself at the door, and felt her arms seized in the grip of iron. The hag laughed shrilly. She was evidently half-witted, but bright enough for Poroshin's purposes. Looking up into the hideous face, maddened by the slow ticking of the clock in the corner, telling away the moments of her lover's life, Marcia struck, with all the power of her frenzy, straight into the woman's eyes. In an uncanny silence they rolled upon the floor, tearing at one another with their bare fingers, struggling for a throat-hold. The blood from a dozen scratches filled Marcia's eyes, wet her lips. She was suddenly filled with a kind of animal fury, the woman creature fighting for her mate. Only half the other size, she somehow found herself kneeling upon her broad, muscular chest, and tying her arms close to her sides with the silken sash of the morning gown flung across a nearby chair, then dragging the snarling but helpless bulk into a corner, where her shouts would not be heard, she sprang to the door and flung it wide. How she made her way to her lover's room she could never remember afterward, only a vague impression of wild faces, the sharp pain of her panting lungs, a half-remembrance of a man with kind eyes who had given her a ride in his automobile for part of the way, stairs that seemed to be as high and steep as mountains, a doorknob that would not turn in her nerveless fingers, and at last, Michael. Michael, haggard and unshaven, in strange mud-splotched garments, staring at her wild appearance with startled eyes. A word told her errand. She clung to him, faint with dread. "What shall we do?" he said hopelessly. "I have no friends who would hide us, and if they take you, God forbid, we had better die together here and now." "Wait," she bade him. There is one place where they would never think of looking for you, and that is my rooms. He will not return there until he has found you. And in the meantime we can think, can plan. Come, we must go quickly, or we'll be too late." Another furtive journey through the maddened streets, and they were back in Marcia's room. In the stress of the moment she forgot the woman she had left behind the portieres. She clung to Michael. "Safe," she whispered. "Oh, thank heaven!" But she had not counted on their enemy. Even as she spoke, heavy footsteps grated in the corridor outside, and Peter Poroshin stood before them, laughing triumphantly over folded arms. "You were not very flattering, Marcia, when you rated me for a fool," he chuckled. "I put myself in your place, and the rest was simple. I rejoice to see, Your Highness," he made a derisive bow, "that you have no weapon. It simplifies matters." He prolonged his triumph, savoring it enjoyingly. "And now, Marcia, what have you to say to the little proposition I made to you an hour ago?" Michael took a step forward, furious. "I'll be damned if you—" Out of the dark corner moved a giant figure, taking from the table as it passed something long and slender that gleamed. Marcia alone saw her, and the moan of despair on her lips halted in sheer surprise. The slender thing that glittered like steel rose in the air and descended into Peter Poroshin's heart. "He was cruel to me. I hated him," the hag gurgled, and fell on her knees, crawling across the carpet to touch the girl's skirt with reverent fingers. Michael felt Marcia's shudder against him. No longer the leader, the protectress, but a woman with a woman's need of being sheltered and loved. He took her hands in his great clasp. "Marcia, look at me, my dearest. There is no barrier between us any longer. I had meant to tell you. The peasants burned Ott's castle, and he and she perished in the flames. I am not a prince now, only a man who needs his woman. Marcia, come with me, woman God made for me." "Whither thou goest, my lord," Marcia said with a great gladness, "I will go." End of section 6.